In your own words, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career.
Sure. Thanks, Jill. And thanks for the intro. Yeah. Um, so without knowing the background of all the folks on the call, I'll just maybe touch on a few things in the hopes that it makes me empathetic, because I think one of the things I'm known for is being an investor, which isn't always the most empathetic or sympathetic role that I play. But I was an entrepreneur, so going right back, I'm originally from Ontario, but moved to BC in kind of the mid '90s, and I was an entrepreneur with a company that still exists actually. The parent was called Multi-Active. The product's called Maximizer. Some of you may know it or use it or see it as you drive across the Cambie Bridge there. See the headquarters. So that was my first real exposure to tech. I worked in the U.S. So I've kind of been an entrepreneur. I then moved into the investing space, as Jill mentioned. I was briefly at BDC. I was also started my own fund. In about 2011, I started focusing in an area called digital health. And then TELUS came calling and asked me to kind of run their ventures group, which is a division of TELUS that invests in startups around the world, actually, not only in digital health, but across the entire spectrum of products and services that TELUS. So that was my first experience really in a big company. And, I used to be called an executive, and I used to kind of recoil and go, well, what does that mean? I've been an investor and I've been an entrepreneur. Now I'm an executive. Feels like I'm going backwards. Um, but anyway, I definitely developed some affinity to or maybe some empathy of my own in terms of how big companies work and the kinds of people who work in big companies, who I think we are all aware sometimes are constrained by the environments that they operate in, and through no fault of their own are, forced to sort of make trade-offs that we think big companies don't need to make, but that's not the case. They do, just like small companies. And then lastly, I would say, to kind of round out my personal background, just having left TELUS at the end of 2021, I kind of became an advisor. So I was asked by a number of corporates to help them start corporate venture funds. So I helped Deloitte Ventures start their Canadian group. I'm helping Canadian Tire launch their corporate venture fund, which is really a nice way to hold the executive and the entrepreneur tension, right? You get to work with big companies and the resources they have, but you get to spend your time talking and working with startups and growth stage companies as well. So I'm really enjoying that. And I was trying to think about the BC companies that I've invested in, been on the board of, and here's a quick list, and I'd love if any of you have further questions. So Xantrex, this is going to date me a bit. Xantrex and Ballard and Creo back in the day, Vision Critical, now called Alita, Sonogistics, Lifestyle RX, talking more present day, Lifestyle RX, which is a health tech company, Clue, Sanctuary, Ecoation, Pocket Pills, Impro AI, and a company called Alaya Care, which has bought a local company here called Procura. So those are just my BC investments. And the last thing I'll say is, Jill mentioned it, but I have a deep passion for social impact, and so I was one of the founders of something called Social Venture Partners, and I'm now an advisor to a local fund called Spring, and so trying to keep my hand in that area as well. Anyway, more detail than probably anybody wanted to know, but there you
Remarkably empathetic for an investor.
go.
Thank you for that. Now we are really excited that you were able to find time in your incredibly packed schedule to take on the role of board chair at BC Tech. We're both, well, I like to say, unapologetically ambitious for British Columbia and BC's tech sector. But tell me, what was it that caused you to think, you know what, I would like to lean in at this moment and take over this role? And what's your hope? What's your dream? What's your vision for where we might go together?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll take it in two parts. The first is kind of why I agreed to step up, and I always joke it was the, of course, lucrative pay package, which is a joke because it's obviously a nonprofit unpaid position. But I think it always starts with people, to be kind of generic in that comment. So obviously the opportunity to work with you, Jill, with Erica and Brian, the rest of the team at BC Tech, and we're going to talk about the board maybe in a bit more detail, but I think the individuals on that board are really exceptional. The companies they come from are both at the small end of the spectrum, but also the large end of the spectrum. Some of the real leaders in BC. So obviously, an opportunity to kind of work with that group was a big part of it. But I also think it's a really, I think, I hesitate to say challenging. It's an important time for tech in BC. And I have a friend who's on his fifth startup, and he described 2023 as the hardest year of his professional life. Now that's saying something when you've been, riding the roller coaster on five different businesses over his career. So I think 2024 to the poll that just mentioned, we may not be heading backwards, but I don't know that it's quite the up and to the right that we all like it to be. So part of my thinking, my personal motivation was, giving back to the community in a way that's meaningful through an organization that's got the credibility, that's got the competency, that's got the core kind of folks around the table, not only the board, but the members, because I think our community needs it. I don't think we're always punching our weight in terms of a sector in this province, be it with our private sector partners or our public sector partners. So it was really an opportunity to kind of get exposure to all those things.
That's excellent. Well, I mean, certainly I'm really excited about um, the intensity of your ambition and your drive to help us do even more than we're doing today. Now, you did mention, I mean, our board is a pretty impressive group of people, and certainly one of the best parts of my job is getting to spend some time with those folk and getting their advice and their guidance. But maybe we could just unpack that a little bit for people on the call. Like, tell us a little bit more about the nature of the board personalities and what motivates them to be involved, and the nature of our discussions and where we're hoping to go together.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, we are always looking for good candidates. So for those on the call who are members or are thinking of becoming members, which is a prerequisite to be on the board, but we would encourage you to put your hand up and say, hey, listen, this is something from a professional development perspective or a sponsorship perspective I'd like to consider. So that's the first thing, is just the open call. The board is, I would say, incredibly diverse, not only kind of in the personal background of the individuals, but we've got a real diversity in terms of the companies that they represent. And so at the high end, you've got the Amazons and the Microsofts and the EAs and the Teleses, which, let's be clear, are contributing to the economy, but don't need our help in terms of advocacy and things like that. But it's important to amplify the work that we do as a small nonprofit with some of those organizations. And so it's great to have, frankly, the leaders, the BC based leaders of some of those organizations involved on the board. And those people are all, amazing folks. We have kind of growth stage, if I can call them that, companies like Stem Cell that are really kind of active in, advocating for a particular sector, be it life sciences, but also have, ambitions to be even bigger and bolder. And so getting that energy in the room. And then, I think it's really critical that we haven't lost sight of the real seed early stage companies. And so we've got, an amazing woman, Simran Khan, who's running a company called My Family Office. Just an amazing, scrappy entrepreneur. We were hearing her story at dinner the other night, and it's just really amazing. Josh Nilsson, who's an Indigenous entrepreneur, who started East Side Games. And so I think just having that diversity of real early, real scrappy entrepreneurs, the executives at the other end of the spectrum, and folks like myself, maybe somewhere in the middle, it just makes our board really a great place for me personally to learn from, but also I think for the community and the industry to profit from.
Yeah, I would say that the it is a lively group that is very future oriented, and how can we improve, and never sort of sitting on our laurels and thinking we've got to the finish line. We are all very determined to drive further change in BC. And I think one thing you and I talked about, Rich, is it's not just the tech sector for the tech sector, although that's clearly our primary focus. It's also how technology can be an enabler and a tool and a driver of greater profitability and sustainability for every company across BC's economy. I think it's astonishing how much technology underwrites BC's economy today, whether you measure it through GDP or jobs. But I don't think that that's always how we perceive ourselves. And that's one of my missions is to change the way we see BC's economy so that it's closer aligned to the data of what we actually are.
Yeah, and maybe just to pick up on that, Jill, like I think I certainly didn't know this before I got involved in BC Tech, but again, I think, it's maybe part of that Canadian personality where we undersell ourselves as an industry. For example, the tech industry in BC employs more people than the mining, the oil and gas, and forestry combined, right? So including the manufacturing associated with those. So that's a very powerful voice. Also, when you think about the general kind of compensation for tech employees being 2 to 3 times higher than others, sources in sort of the private sector, be they services, jobs, what have you, that is a higher income, which is good for the industry, but it's also a higher tax base, which of course the government takes great note of. And it's not just relative size, but it's our growth rate, right? Everybody running a business knows growth rate is critical. And so our growth rate is about 2 times, maybe even more when we get last year's stats, but it was in 2022. The growth rate of the tech sector is twice what it is of some of those other sectors in terms of employment. And to your point around, all companies are tech companies nowadays. I've had the opportunity to spend time with some folks in forestry and other sectors. They are as keen to figure out how to harness startup power, energy, enthusiasm, entrepreneurialism as anyone. Do they have the muscles always? No, but they're trying to get there. And so, from a BC Tech membership perspective, I think it's critical for people to understand, even if you're not in a tech company, or even if you're selling to non-tech industry, we can be a great voice for the, kind of those connections that we can make to the non-tech sector too.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're tech curious and not sure where to start, please get involved because there's lots of ways we can broker great connections and help you to sort of explore how to tech enable your own business. Um, One thing is, of course, we can't do it all on our own. So we've got BC Tech, we've got our members. We're so proud of them. At nearly 1,000 now, and very actively engaged in trying to help us to advance our mission. But we also work very closely with governments, with other organizations, with our key members and sponsors, because we all really share an ambition, I think, about what we're trying to achieve in BC's tech sector. I was curious how we could go further with that. So, what can we learn from elsewhere? I know you've had a lot of experience in places other than BC. Were you a member of the C100 or attended their sessions down in
Yeah.
California? What do you think we can learn from that Californian spirit, or from things that we see in other super high performing tech sectors that might be valuable for BC?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the million or billion-dollar question is how do we kind of sprinkle some of that Silicon Valley magic around? I don't think there's an easy answer, and folks much smarter than I have tried. But what I can tell you is, for those not familiar, C100 is an organization that basically, excuse me, works to build connections between Canadian entrepreneurs or companies and folks that are Canadian that happen to be in other jurisdictions like the Bay Area or Boston or what have you. John Stackhouse from RBC wrote a great book about the Canadian diaspora. It is mind numbing. I'm assuming most people know this, but when you go elsewhere and you meet people who are running important tech companies of whatever size, it is shocking how many times they're Canadian. And there's always that for me anyway, that personal sense of loss when you first find out they're Canadian, because you're like, boy, it'd be great if you were in Canada doing this. But of course, people are going to go where they go. But I think harnessing the Canadian personality and elements and doing it here, the difference that I see, the big one is we don't scale up companies to the extent and to the sort of penetration rate that they do in the US or other markets. And so that has obviously problems because those companies don't become global. They tend to get acquired and become pieces of global companies. And the second part is more importantly, almost in my opinion, is we don't train the talent that then goes out and becomes the founder, the entrepreneur with the deep domain expertise that then raises the capital, that then begets the next generation. So, if you trace the history of Silicon Valley right back, it starts with, the Fairchild Semiconductor and the Trader State, and that became Intel, and then Intel spun out. So you see these explosions of talent density, entrepreneurial expertise, engineering that has done it before. And I don't think we are doing as good as we could be in those scale ups in Canada, which again, back to BC Tech, is a core part of our mission, as you well know, Jill, is to help those companies with all the programming and support and C counts, et cetera, to kind of get that critical mass going. But yeah, it's a problem I wish we could solve overnight, but like anything, it's not that easy.
No, not that easy, but also not impossible. So exactly as you say, there's things you can change. There's things you can't change. Personally, I like to spend my time on the things I think I can change. And that key point of providing entrepreneurs who are scaling up with exactly the right kind of training, the right kind of advisors, the right kind of skill sets, there is a role that BC Tech can play there. And there's also a role for those that do manage to scale up and become global companies. One of the things I am most proud of is how actively engaged with BC Tech our local BC unicorns are. So, unicorn, of course, company that's valued at $1 billion or more. There's a number of them. They lend us their time, they lend us their expertise. Just before Christmas, we spoke to Jack Newton of Clio, who had some amazing advice, which we've packaged in our Scale Up Academy. People can watch that there. And we've got more of that content coming. So that role of sort of distilling advice and in a usable video content, and also setting people up with one-on-one mentorship sessions. It's when those who have done it volunteer to give back for the next generation that I think we're reaching a really exciting flywheel model, and it is happening and improving things. So it's great. But as you say, we can't do it all on our own. Um, if we think ahead and we sort of think about where we are in BC, where we are in BC Tech, where BC as an economy is, what might be happening in the rest of the world over the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think some of the specific strengths we might have? Like, where are strengths that BC and BC's tech sector could lean into? What are challenges that we might face? And what vision could we hope to have for 5 or 10 years hence?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to beat up on on the money side. I mean, I always hear this concern, criticism, complaint that we're not funding enough companies here in BC. And I pulled some stats the other day, and if it's okay, I'll just kind of rattle a few of those off because, and I'll come back to why I think it's important. But if you look at, so over the last 10 years in Canadian venture capital, and again, I'll talk about venture capital just because I am a venture capitalist, but also I know many folks out there, entrepreneurs who may be looking at raising venture money or in organizations that work in that ecosystem. And if you look at the last 10 years in Canada, we've invested about 55 billion in about 2,700 venture-backed companies. So you say, okay, are we getting our share here in BC? And if you take our population share or our GDP share and you say, are we getting kind of roughly that amount of dollars? And the answer is we're about 13 to 15% of population or GDP. And we get about 18% of the venture dollars or have over that 10-year period. Ontario, which is at about 40, gets about 44. Quebec, which is at about 25, gets about 26. So everybody is kind of getting, if you will, with a little bit of sort of, fudging, everybody's kind of getting their share. So there's not a gross distortion. The difference is what if you dig a bit deeper, Quebec deploys for in within Quebec about 15 has deployed about 15 billion of that. And they've done that with about 80 venture funds. Okay. Now BC has done 10 billion, so about a third less than Quebec, and has done it with 200 active venture funds. So what that tells you right away is we have a lot more funds with a lot less money each. And so I have a lot of sympathy, back to my kind of empathy comments at the beginning, for entrepreneurs who get frustrated in BC because they kind of go around to lots of funds, none of whom can write big checks. And so I think that's a critical problem. So when I look at the strengths and weaknesses, I go, yeah, we're getting our fair share in holistic terms, but we're kind of underserviced, undersupplied, subscale in terms of the venture economy. So that I look at that and I go, that's a problem because you do need large firms that can fund the capital through. Now we're addressing that. Good news. Things like NBC and others are working hard to provide capital to domestic managers. We'll see if that strategy bears fruit, in our lifetime. I'm hopeful it will. But that's a big problem or an issue that I think needs addressing. And the other thing is you touched on it, the subscale in terms of the companies that get to 200 employees. We have 11,000 tech companies in BC. We have about 1% that get to that 200 employees. So that's not great, and it's far below averages in other jurisdictions. So all that to say, I mean, I think I look at it and I go, you need the investment, you need the exits. The exits create the next generation entrepreneurs. We're not getting the exits given what's happening in the macro climate now, but we need to be patient. I think our relationship with government is good. Full credit to you and the team. I think it could be better in terms of telling the story, writ large about how important tech is in BC, and obviously we're working on that. And the last thing I look at, I'm contractually obligated to talk about AI, given I'm a venture guy, but the truth is I'm an LP in a fund called Radical, which is probably one of the top AI funds in the world, and they've done one deal in BC. This is a Toronto-based company, and they've got the who's who of AI sort of experts on their team, and they don't see BC yet as an area to spend time. Whereas most people on this call are very aware there's lots of really interesting technology happening in AI application development, research, et cetera. So when you look at the industries that are growing and will grow exponentially, of course, AI being one of them, we are in a very good spot. I'm just concerned we take advantage of that opportunity kind of in the moment.
I think that's great. I love that reality check around, we've got the right amount of money, but it's dispersed. We've got a scale up problem in capital as much as we have in entrepreneurs.
Totally.
So just one reminder to everyone on the call, don't hesitate to raise your questions in the chat. I'll happily come to them shortly. But I want to come back to that point that you raised off the top of the call, Rich, where you were saying that the serial entrepreneur who's done multiple businesses said that 2023 was just the toughest year of his career. And I know that many of us are sort of happy to close the door on 2023. And we saw that, people are hopeful about 2024. What's your personal view about what we're going to see in 2024? How will we know when we're turning the corner? Is there anything you're particularly worried about in terms of lagging the recovery and a return to brighter economic conditions? And is there any opportunity to be successful even during tough times? Just your thoughts on how we navigate challenging times, continuing challenging times.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned my role at Canadian Tire. I mean, one of the things I've found in technology industry is we sometimes can forget about the broader world. I mean, we forget about Main Street in that parlance sometimes. We're so, enthralled with technology and the potential that we forget about kind of what the average consumer is going through. So the lens that Canadian Tire has given me is a little bit into that mainstream consumer. And this is, I'm not telling tales out of school, it's a public company, so you can all go do your research, but it's concerning. I mean, whether it's housing affordability, which of course is a BC hot button too, but people are spending far less. They're making real constraints on their spending, personal, professional. So my own view is we are not nearly out of the woods yet. We have some signs of a soft landing in Canada, but I'd be a lot more confident if I was in the US versus Canada. I think we are still struggling with, call it the housing cost issues and will for some time till rates come down. So I think if you have a business that is predicated on consumer spending, it's challenging and will be for the balance of 2024. If you have a business that is predicated on saving other businesses money, cost constraints, et cetera, I would be a lot more bullish because I certainly see that, in every board meeting I sit in, it's like, how do we take 10, 20% of the costs out of the business? Having said that, I think that the conversation, and again, I'll make fun of venture capitalists because we stampeded hard to tell every company, you got to get profitable. You got to cut your costs. You got to, this is it. The world is ending, 2023. That's what every board discussion was. And now people are starting to say, oh, wait a minute, let's not forget about growth, right? Let's keep growing at 30, 40% of the year. Otherwise, you're not a very valuable business. So the pendulum is swinging back. And I have some specific things that I look for that I can comment on later, but I do feel like it's cautious optimism to your poll with some segmentation around priorities or sectors that people happen to be operating in. And the last thing I'll say is I think 45 or 50% of the planet is going through an election in 2024. So like obviously the US, BC, Canada might be federal, it might be next year, it might be late, who knows. But the US will be very paralyzed for the next, I think, 6 to 9 months as that happens. And it's worrisome that we are trending right to pretty non-participatory democracy in a lot of these countries that are undergoing elections, and that worries me on just a macro basis.
Yeah, I definitely share those concerns and those that sort of cautious, caution about let's just stay very focused on the fundamentals in 2024. Maybe just to give a shout out, actually, one of the things that I'm a little bit excited about is we'll see what the results are. But the BC government has established a digitization of housing and housing permits committee, and they're quite focused on how can we deploy technology to increase housing supply or speed up the bringing on of new housing supply to the market. And so, very happy to be involved in that committee, advocating on behalf of our members, and hopefully adding value to BC. But it is a really worthy initiative that the government is leaning into, and a topic that is very relevant for tech employees, very relevant for tech employers, and very, very relevant for everyone in every other industry sector in BC. So hopefully we can affect some positive change there. Now, I did want to come back to your question and come back to your core role as an investor. So, got a lot of startups on the line. How do I get to yes with Rich? What are the things that you look for? What are the fundamentals that you look for where if they're there, it's positive. If they're not there, you might take a pass. What piques your interest as an investor when you're looking at a startup?
Yeah, I think it's two things, and I'm pretty simple, so they're not complicated and they'll seem obvious. The first is, the person, the people, and not just are they likable or are they forceful, but I've never made a decision immediately in 15 minutes to invest, but I've gotten to about 90% conviction to invest in the first 15 minutes or not to invest. So it's you can tell when someone communicates because after the end of the day, raising capital, whether it's from me or from another venture capitalist, is about selling the story, selling yourself and selling the story. And people who are great salespeople, they will be good at selling their product to customers. They will be good at selling their company to employees. They will be good at selling their company to raise money. So that skill set is a see-through through line and everything. And you can tell that fairly quickly. How they answer questions, are they thoughtful? Have they thought about it? If they haven't, can you tell that they're willing to think about it? So those are the first things. It's kind of the personal sort of dynamics, obviously their background, but not every entrepreneur has built a business before. So a lot of times they are first time entrepreneurs, and I'm still willing to write checks in those cases if see the. And the second thing is, I was on a board. I am on a board with the former CTO of Shopify, and everybody looks at management lessons from Amazon, rightly so, great company, their memos and things like that they do that are real innovations in corporate culture. Shopify, for my money, is right up there. Like the way they think about things is amazing. Now it's a big company, but one of the things he said to me once, which has stuck with me for years, is he said, your infrastructure. So it doesn't matter what size company you are. You can be this big as Shopify or a 3-person startup. Your infrastructure, which is often a dirty word, people think, well, what is that? Overhead? Like, hyperscaling costs? Like, what's infrastructure? And it's really just whatever it is that you have decided is unique and your core competency. Okay. So it could be your engineering talent. It could be as a nonprofit with BC Tech, it could be the team and the board and the mission. For a mid-stage company, it could be your intellectual property. It doesn't really matter. But whatever that is, the ability to generate, and this is going to sound a bit engineering speak, but it's the ability to generate features and the ability to run experiments, right? So if you imagine infrastructure drives features, drive experiments. Those experiments inform your features. Those features inform your infrastructure. So now you've got this flywheel. You've all heard the Amazon flywheel, et cetera. But you've got this flywheel where you can try different things really quickly. Because who knows at the end of the day if a product's going to work or a feature is going to work. But the faster you can iterate on that, the more competitive and the more success you'll have. And it's always struck me as a simple tool to really try and figure out, okay, nobody knows if that product's going to work. I don't as an investor, assuming it hasn't launched yet, the management doesn't work. But how quickly can they pivot? How quickly can they learn? Do they have the infrastructure in place to learn from those things and turn that flywheel as quickly as possible? And if you get the sense they've got the ability, the adaptability, the intelligence, the team, that's an easy yes for me.
Thank you. Um, just to our audience, I think you can see why I enjoy working with 12 versions of Rich on my board. I get wisdom every time we talk. Okay, so we've got people on the call who've been members for a long time. We've got people who aren't members. We have people who might be wondering if membership would be something for them. What do you tend to say when you're telling people in your network about the value of being involved with BC Tech?
Yeah, I think it depends on what size company you are and what industry you happen to be in within technology, or whether you're out of technology. But just some of the specific ones that I would say are hard and defined benefits to join in joining. So one would be, I think you get a better profile. You the BC Tech member map. You are just kind of in the flow of events and activities. You can, of course, participate in specific activities, you, the founder, or employees on the team, or whomever. And again, these could be nonprofits. They could be, not distinguishing between what the organization's size or mandate is. There's the credibility that you get with employees, with other partners, with maybe with venture capitalists from that participation. I think if you're non-tech, you then get exposure to a whole community of folks that you can learn from and potentially partner with. There's lead generation and networking. So those are all the benefits. And then I usually give. And part of that is, I always quote Spider-Man. You've heard me say this before, but it's like with power comes responsibility. And if you're a member of tech and you have an organization like BC Tech that is out advocating, working with government, putting on events, flying the flag for you, all of that kind of stuff, that doesn't come for free. And so there's a little bit of monetary give back, but it's also the time. It's also the giving of your particular skills. I mentioned opportunities to join the board. It's opportunities to attend C councils and give your voice and your experience to a community that can learn from you. That give back, I don't care what size you are or how busy you are. I mean, I think that needs to be a part of, or should be a part of, everybody's calculus when there's a community that's as important to where we live and work as tech is.
Thank you. I think that's really great. Yeah, I mean, we're all wanting to make sure that we're delivering tons and tons of value to our members. I'm noticing in the chat, individuals. So individuals at BC Tech is an organization of corporate members. So it's the company, the employer that's a member. We do have an individual membership stream for students, which you're welcome to join. And the primary benefit for the employees or the corporate or the student is to access our knowledge management and to access our startup school curriculum. You get a certificate at the end of it. Scale Up Academy, you get a certificate at the end of it. Everything you need to know to scale a company in BC. So there's a lot of different things you can get out of that. It's primarily about educational and advisory content for you as an individual to develop your career, to develop your skills. I've got another question in the chat, which is, as an investor, what do you think is missing or lacking in BC's innovation ecosystem to support emerging tech or to support that point you raised, AI enabled areas? So, what would you say, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a bit, but so what is a flourishing ecosystem look like, right? Let's work top down. You've got institutions, not to suggest the top is the most important, but I'm just mental mapping it. So the top is institutions that support the investment community. Support meaning give money to venture capitalists, because I think everybody understands venture capitalists have to perform, but they also have to raise money themselves. So those institutions that I'm referring to can be pension plans, they can be corporates, they can be individuals, high net worths, family offices, et cetera. But there needs to be an ecosystem there that then gives funds money. The funds themselves then need to be active and have scale, to my earlier comments around being subscale and the challenges that presents to entrepreneurs. Then there needs to be, of course, the entrepreneurs that have viable opportunities in businesses. And then below that is both the anchor companies that they come from or work at or partner with or sell to, right? And that ecosystem needs to be vibrant and diversified and sort of have enough substantive buying power. And then below that is the academia, research, nonprofit community that feeds up into all of those other layers of the ecosystem. So when you have that community working and firing, which I would argue, places like Toronto have done a nice job. If you take AI to your example, the question there, I mean, I think you've got Perimeter Institute in quantum, you've got CDL, which we have out here as well. You've got Vector AI Institute, all around helping very nascent research and development commercialize. We've got pieces of that out here. We don't have it all, but we're working to build that. And then the last thing you need to make that whole system go is you need exits, right? You need companies that sell, that return money to the VCs, so they return money to the institutions, and you can start the whole flywheel again. We don't get our proportional share of exits in BC that are meaningful enough to make that whole system go, because we tend to subscale and sell out early for all the reasons I mentioned. So long answer to a short question around, that's in my view a healthy ecosystem, and you need to attack it obviously in a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different things, but there's no one silver bullet that kind of translates into to success.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I'm actually just going to pick up on the word you used there as exit because I know we've got a few government folk on the line, and the venture capital jargon of exit is sometimes misunderstood by those outside the industry as meaning that the company leaves BC, the jobs leave BC. No, no, no. The money comes in to BC. It's like the opposite of an exit. Money rushes in to BC and then is recycled. And today, if you're building, scaling, or selling a tech company, you are basically selling the value of the employees and what's in their heads. So it's quite unusual for someone to pay a healthy sum to acquire a business and then eliminate all the jobs. So that's one of those false beliefs that sometimes persists, but actually isn't backed up by the data. Now, listen, we've taken a lot of your time, and I'm really appreciative of it. And you've given us some amazing insights, which we will mine for content on Scale Up Academy. And I do have one final question, though, because we said off the top this is going to be a challenging year. 2024 isn't, we're not out of the woods yet. And I've got a lot of startups on the line, and they know the realities of this market. They're living it day to day. But some encouragement, perhaps. What words of advice would you give? What words of encouragement would you give about building a business during difficult times?
I think don't give up. The number one job is not to put too fine a point on it, but is the number one job of an entrepreneur is not to run out of money. So don't give up, keep going. Every single successful story was facing death or irrelevance or defection of key employees or a loss of a customer. Or a complete pivot from an original market to something they knew nothing about. um, I think most people know that, but it's hard in the moment, when those things are happening and sometimes all at once to keep the faith. I know it was for me and has been in a bunch of businesses I've been involved with since. So the number one is keep going. The other thing is, I think, I touched on this around maybe people are familiar with this rule of X. I like formulas. I mean, the rule of X was you take your growth rate and your EBITDA, your profit, and you add them together and they should add up to 40. So if you're losing 20%, your EBITDA is 20% negative, you should be growing 60%. That's changed. The new thing is kind of this notion of the rule of X, where you overweight the growth rate at the expense of EBITDA. So you're still adding the two together, but you're multiplying the growth rate by 2, 3 times, depending on the stage and sector. So if you're not familiar with it, look at it, be realistic. Be your own worst critic and look at your business and say, where do I fit in that? Am I top quartile, last quartile? Because it's an objective way to say, what kind of business do I really have? I think one of the common challenges I see in entrepreneurs is they they want to have a big business, but they've convinced themselves that either venture capital or some third party approach of financing it is the only way to get there. And it's clearly not. I mean, there are a ton of amazing businesses that are 5, 10, 15 million in revenue and great. They may not be venture capital businesses and probably aren't. They'll never be hundreds of millions, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue the idea. It doesn't mean you can't run a great business. It doesn't mean you can't be a gameful employer. So I just encourage people to be pragmatic about where in that sort of financing spectrum they sit. And that's yeah, that's it.
I think that's great. Know yourself, be the best possible version of yourself. And it isn't one size fits all success. As you say, many businesses might not be venture backed, but they're still successful, employing people and delivering great profits. So, listen, Rich, thank you so much again for your time today. We have really appreciated it.